Good evening. Good evening, people of Burgess Hill and surrounding areas. Thank you. What can I say but thank you so much for coming along. We are blown away. So let's hear it together. My name is Chris French. I am the chairman of an organisation called Mid-Sussex Assembly. We've been in existence for about 6 months now, I guess, and we number about 175 members on Telegram and Facebook and what have you. And we meet on a regular basis. We meet here at this very building on a weekly basis, Mondays, and we alternate Mondays and Wednesdays. And if you want to find out more about us, perhaps consider joining us. We'd love to have you as members. And there's a website, mid-sussexassembly.org, so please go check us out on there. I'm delighted to say that this is being live streamed tonight on YouTube. My friend Caesar there in the middle there is doing a grand job, bless him. And also Davey, where's Davey? Davey's also videoing it too. Thank you very much, Davey, so well done you too. Well, we have got a fantastic panel for you tonight. Many of you may know the speakers here, but obviously I'll introduce them more formally in a moment. But very briefly, we have Anna Buisseret, fantastic senior lawyer. Thank you so much for coming. We have David Kurten, who is the leader of the Heritage Party. So let's hear for David. And we have Dr. Neil Mcrae, and thank you ever so much for coming along. I have invited a fourth speaker, a gentleman called Brendan Chilton, who is a Labour councillor over in Ashford in Kent, and he has spoken before, and he's absolutely brilliant. He's an absolute powerhouse. He's very articulate, very humorous, a wonderful speaker, a wonderful orator. But unfortunately, he can't make it tonight, and he messaged me to say, and the irony is that he's been tested positive. So he, in his place, I would like to invite my good friend Jonathan Lee, a lawyer here, to say a few words on his behalf, because Brendan's written a little bit of a spiel to give to Jonathan, just to sort of basically provide a substitute, if you like, but it's very hard to substitute Brendan O'Neill. So very, very quickly, I'd just like to say that Brendan Chilton is a councillor for Stenhope Ward and leader of the Ashford Labour Group. Brendan is the Labour Group spokesperson for finance and economy. Brendan is also secretary of the Ashford Labour Party. Brendan has been a councillor for Stenhope since 2011 and Labour leader in Ashford since 2015. He runs his own consultancy and he has worked in business and in the public sector. Brendan is also a member of and the vice chair of Stanhope Parish Council and is chair of governors at a local primary school. In 2015, Brendan was Labour's parliamentary candidate for Ashford. He's a historian, a writer and a regular commentator on national radio. So please, let's hear it for Jonathan speaking on behalf of Brendan.
Hopefully this works. Great. I thought I'd dress up today, so I think I'm the only person with a tie, but one of my t-shirts that otherwise go on the protest with. So, yeah, don't know already, I'm a solicitor, so I thought I'd look the part a bit. So yeah, Brendan's written a great email. I'll read it out. Bear with me, hopefully I get the tone right. So, dear friends and colleagues, first of all, can I offer you all my sincere apologies for not being able to be with you all this evening. Unfortunately, yesterday I tested positive for COVID-19 and have to isolate according to the law. I'm thoroughly disappointed that I'm not able to be with you this evening for this important meeting to discuss how we can take back control of our lives after the events of the past 2 years. Yeah, it's almost 2 years now. Amazing. I last spoke with Chris, another group, back in 2016 on the great issue of the day, namely our membership of the European Union. I'm delighted to say that my side triumphed in that campaign, and so I hope that tonight's meeting contributes in equal measure to the next mission of our time, namely that of restoring our freedoms and liberties. Can I congratulate the organisers of this meeting and thank them for their diligent work on continuing to promote democratic discussion on the issues of the day. Can I also offer my best wishes wishes to the panel tonight and offer them my apologies for not being able to be here in person. I will, however, be watching on the live stream. When the coronavirus pandemic hit this country, we knew very little about it, and so naturally the government, supported by the opposition parties, imposed extraordinary measures to try and keep as many of us as safe as possible. The British people largely adhered to the rules, and a national spirit carried the nation through the worst days of the pandemic. We clapped our key workers, we all queued for toilet roll and pasta, and spent large sums of money on bottles and bottles of hand sanitizer, which luckily we don't see anymore. Things are moving on positively, I think. But that summer of 2020, when people spend their afternoons sipping cool gin and tonics in their gardens, seems so far away now. Vaccine passports, travel restrictions, compulsory vaccines in Europe, police firing on protesters in Holland, quarantine camps in Australia, the unvaccinated losing their jobs, lockdowns in Austria, building back better. It all has an incredible Orwellian feel to it. Let me state here and now, the COVID virus is real and it's dangerous. I'm repeating Brendan's words here. It is particularly dangerous, again, for those with underlying conditions. As I write this statement this afternoon, I cannot taste or smell my coffee, and my breathing is difficult. I have COVID, but I am double jabbed. Nobody is denying the severity of the virus and the pressure our NHS has experienced. But what we are challenging is the right of a government to govern every aspect of our lives. Earlier in October, the COVID laws were extended for an additional 6 months. The right to restrict the right to assembly, the right to protest, the right to trial by jury, the retention of DNA, new powers for the police and intelligence services, the right to trade freely, the right to date someone, to go to a gym, to travel, and all other rights exist at the whim of a parliamentary vote. England is no longer a free country. It is, as the Right Honourable Steve Baker MP has said, a dystopian society. There are also ghastly rumours of mandatory vaccination, mandatory testing, and other hideous infringements on our liberties. Other members of the panel will describe more eloquently their own experiences and views on our present situation, but I will say only this: all of this will only end when we, the people, say it must end. History is littered with examples. History is littered with examples of regimes, systems, and governments that have imposed all manner of curtailments on the liberties of men and women. Those regimes, systems, and governments have only been beaten when the people have taken a stand for freedom. We have the most successful vaccine programme in Europe. The British people have done their bit. Let freedom be restored now. Very best wishes, Brendan.
Wow.
Fine words from Brendan, and I'm sure you would agree with me to wish you well, rapid recovery. So I know you're watching, Brendan. We wish you well. Let's hear it from him. I've just remembered I need to point out emergency exits in the event of a fire. So there's a fire door there, obviously, and obviously the way that you came in is another way out there. I would just like to add that I'm just a spokesman for the group, and a lot of people have been involved in organising this, so I just want to say a big thank you to all my team members. You know who you are, you worked extremely well, getting the message out, and obviously your hard work is reflected in the turnout tonight, so my thanks again. The format for tonight is that we will hear from each speaker for approximately 10 minutes. That will then be followed by the most important part, question and answers. We want to hear your questions. What concerns you? What do you want to know more about possibly? And we will do our best to address those concerns. Our first speaker is Anna de Buisseret. Is that a good pronunciation? Anna has a unique combination of legal training As a city lawyer, a business degree and several years of management consultancy, giving her the ability to apply her legal knowledge in a management consultancy role or vice versa. Her law degree was from Nottingham Trent University and a business degree from Oxford Brookes University. Experience has been gained in the top-tier city law firm and now at a West End law firm specialising in all areas of employment law. Anna has also run her own management consultancy, Time for Balance, specialising in providing consultancy services to businesses in relation to their working practices, strategic vision and implementation, workplace change management, equal opportunities, discrimination, diversity issues, and corporate responsibility. Quite a mouthful, well done. In addition to the legal and consultancy services, Anna provides in-house training on employment and diversity issues, including disabilities in the workplace. She also works with a mental health charity. Anna has strong management leadership and team working skills, having trained at the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, and serving for 9 years as a Territorial Army officer. Please, let's give Anna a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Hello everybody, so lovely to see so many of you here. Can you hear me? Is that what you also didn't mention is that I'm a mother. And I'm a mother of 3 children, and I consider that, as I'm sure you will do, to be an absolute sacred duty. So I draw on that experience as well. But also, I should tell you, I'm a local. I was born in Hurstfield Point. And my family lived in Burgess Hill for a while, so this feels like home to me. All of that experience led me in December of 2019, when this so-called virus, if it even exists, was released into the public domain. My hackles went up immediately, and I thought, this could be a bioweapon. And I gathered intel immediately from the ground from a fellow veteran who lived and worked in Beijing and had done for 10 years, so I knew he knew, could read things between the lines that I couldn't from over here. And we compared notes, and after a couple of hours we said, yeah, we're not happy with this, we're going to go and talk more to our military network. So I reached out into the military, and we agreed that we all had to do some further intel gathering, and we've been doing that ever since. So I'm connected into an international military network of veterans who are brainstorming the situation. And one thing I can tell you, because it was some intel I got this week, is that an awful lot is happening behind the scenes that you won't know about, you won't hear about, and it is happening, and apparently we are winning. So I wanted to reassure you. So that's good news. So, I wanted to reassure you that, some people have been afraid about what's going on in the world in terms of martial law being imposed. But I can tell you, I work with veterans who have been to war, to Afghanistan and places, and I didn't. I was a survival instructor, so ducked and died. But these guys did. And, the one thing they would tell you is they don't want to see war. But they also don't want to see people suffering, and they serve and protect, so they're on it, and I wanted to reassure you all about that. So on the legal side, obviously when the Coronavirus Act came out, again my hackles went up. I read the Act and I thought, this is outrageous, and I was reading the debates on Hansard, and I noted that Matt Hancock in the second reading said, do you know it's taken us months to draft this? Which is what I suspected, because it was a 329-page document of very complex law. You don't draft that in a week. But also, on the 19th of March, it was downgraded to a... yes? So why do you need 329 pages of complex law? So hackles went up, heard Lord Sumption speaking out, and I thought, yeah, his analysis is the same as mine, that they didn't, they were ultra-virus, they didn't have the power to make that act. They claim to have had the power under the Public Health Control of Diseases Act, but it doesn't give them the powers that they're claiming. And they should have used the Contingency Act. So I reached out for other lawyers, found them, and I've been working with them for a year. Jonathan's one of them, wherever he's gone. And we've been, obviously, gathering evidence, working with lawyers not only here, but across the world, together to find out who the best experts are in each point that we're trying to work out what's going on, gather their evidence, cross-examine them, and then look at the legal framework to work out what laws are being broken, and then, of course, what we're going to do about it. Now, to begin with, it wasn't that horrific. But as you know, I've gone public and said that on the analysis, this is genocide, crimes against humanity, biowarfare, war crimes. So, complete breach of the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute, and Nuremberg being replayed all over again, I'm afraid. So when I first went public to tell people that, I was shocked at how many people knew. I thought that people were going to be really disturbed and very upset, and I was dreading telling people, but I was really shocked at the people who came up to me and said, yeah, we know. And I said, okay, so are we at war? And various people, well, virtually everyone I said, are we at war? They said yes. And I said, well, who made the declaration of war? What was the declaration of war? And that's where I want to pick up on the law, because actually, an unlawful act of war is to conduct medical experimentation or medical treatment on people without their consent. You don't even get to do that to prisoners of war in enemy territory. Okay? So this unlawful act of war is being committed by people within our society against other people within our society, and against governments, by governments against their people. So the military network I'm connected with, we've looked at this and said, well, what are the acts of war? And it comes down to the fact that we are all sovereign, as you know. We are born with inalienable, fundamental human rights that cannot be taken away by anybody, with very limited exceptions. So, for example, the right to life. The only time you can derogate from that is if you've been passed down a death sentence, having been judged by your peers and a jury in a proper court of law with due process. If the death penalty applies, then the state has the right to derogate from your right to life. The only other time is an unlawful act of war. So, claiming the right to derogate from your fundamental right to life in a public health emergency, no. The state does not have the right to do that, and nor does anybody else in society. Similarly, the right not to suffer torture, cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. Okay, because obviously that goes to the right to life. That cannot be derogated from either. And you don't get to torture prisoners of war. You don't get to give them cruel, inhumane, degrading treatment, even if they're your prisoner. And the Court of European Human Rights ruled in the case of Pretty versus the United Kingdom in 2002, that giving medical treatment without consent amounts to torture or degrading treatment, cruel and inhumane degrading treatment. So that's where we are, folks, which is quite horrific when you think about it. That all these companies, or the NHS, or our own politicians, claim that they have the right to derogate from your fundamental right to life by mandating that you breach your bodily integrity with masks that cause multiple long-term permanent organ damage, with tests that have got cancerous material on them, contain hydrogel, loose fibres that break off and go down into your system, start the process of lung fibrosis. And then you have these injections, and we know about that. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions now, are dying, have died, suffering life-term disabling injuries. Now, in terms of companies saying, well, we have to put all these health and safety measures in place. Yes, they do, because obviously you have the right to go to work and not be harmed by your employer. But your employer has the duty of care to you, not to harm you. And that's provided by way of a risk assessment, which has to be an individual risk assessment under Regulation 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Management Regulations 1999. Wait! I dream this stuff. Literally, I wake up in the morning and think, what section was that? It's horrendous. But anyway, under that, the employer has a statutory legal duty to individually risk assess you for the harm that these measures will cause you. And we all know that's not happening. It's not happening virtually anywhere. So effectively, employers and the government are playing Russian roulette with people's lives and just saying, it's all safe and effective, it's all for your good, and and it won't harm you. So unfortunately, the position we're in is that we have members of our society who are committing unlawful acts of war on people. They are in breach of the health and safety framework, they're in breach of the human rights laws, they're in breach of, for example, the health and the medicines for human use clinical trials regulations, which sets out how you conduct a clinical trial on a live human subject, including in particular detail how you take a child through a clinical trial, or an incapacitated adult. So the point is, we have all these laws. I've been saying this in my interviews. You know, the legal framework is all there. And actually the reason I ask people to have a look at this, it's because when I start talking about all these laws, people have the idea that these rights are given to us by governments and they can just take them away again. Well, no. And particularly in this society, we are a Christian nation by law. Whatever your personal beliefs are, that is the constitutional position. We are a Christian nation. And before Christ came along, we were a God-fearing nation who upheld the Old Testament. And so we have always had these inalienable rights. And they are enshrined in our statute law in the Magna Carta 1297. And I get very cross when people say, oh, you know, common law doesn't exist, common law is the nonsense, and we don't, you know, I don't know what people are talking about with the Magna Carta. That's a confusion, because yes, we are a common law jurisdiction, and our common law is the law of the land, which is a whole bunch of different laws, including case law. But we also have our statute law, right? It's the laws that have been agreed upon in Parliament by our representatives. And the Magna Carta 1297, as you can see, is still an Act of Parliament. That is on our statute books. And if you go to chapter 29 of that, which is still law, which is on page 5, I shall read it out to you, and it says, chapter 29, imprisonment contrary to law. No free man shall be taken or imprisoned, think quarantine hotels, or be disseized of his freehold, think losing your job so that you lose your property, or liberties, or free customs, because we also can rely on customs in this jurisdiction. It's not just laws that are written down. We have our ancient customs, which are part of our laws. Or be outlawed, so in other words, cast out from society because you're not vaccinated, or exiled, or in any other wise destroyed. Now that's a catch-all for meaning, for example, you don't get to conduct medical treatment on someone, which destroys them in some way. And nor will we pass upon him, nor condemn him, but by lawful judgment of his peers, or by the law of the land. Okay, and we will not deny or defer to any man either justice or right. Now the point of drawing your attention to this Magna Carta is that that is a legally binding social contract between the Crown and the people. And it enshrines the Charter of Liberties, which was granted to we the people by Henry I in 1100. But we paid both monarchs for those rights, so we paid due consideration for them, and those rights, these grants are binding on the Crown and their successors forever, and they are for our ancestors and our successors forever. And what it specifically says in the Magna Carta saving provision is that there's no derogation from these rights, and any attempt to derogate from it in any form of law will be void and of no effect. Right? Now the Magna Carta 1297 was confirmed in 1423 in confirmation of the Charter, still on the statute books. And if you fast forward to the Bill of Rights, the Petition of Rights, 1627, which is still on the statute books, Section 4 is the actual petition, I think it was Section 4, and it sets out, you know, we have these ancient rights and liberties, you, the Crown, are breaching them, stop it, and tell all your ministers and your agents to stop it as well, and promise to hold them going forward. And you'll see that the Crown has written, so be it. And then, of course, we know that the King didn't uphold it, and so in 1641 we had a civil war. He got his head chopped off in 1647 for treason. And in 1688, before the next monarch came onto the crown, we said, you don't get to do this again. Your ancestors have broken our Magna Carta and our previous charters. Before you come to the Crown, you have to sign our Bill of Rights, you have to swear a coronation oath that you'll uphold all of our rights, and you have to make a declaration that you are Protestant and you'll uphold the Church as well. So every monarch has to do that as per the Coronation Oath Act 1688. And indeed, our monarch swore the declaration of the accession to the throne in November 51, and then in June 52, she gave her, was it 52 or 53? She gave her oath to we the people to uphold our laws, to uphold the Church, and to oversee judgment with all mercy. Now, everyone I've asked, has that coronation oath been upheld? Are our laws being upheld? So is the coronation oath being breached?
Yes.
And who's responsible for that? All the agents who are supposed to be swearing allegiance to the Crown, including our ministers who swear an oath, including everybody who has to uphold the Constitution. So the point about all of that is that people don't get to come in here in 2020, 2021 and get rid of all of our laws and say, there's a virus out there that's 99.9% of you will survive, but sod all of this. So, I just wanted to tell you all of that, because not a lot of people seem to... How many of you were aware that all of that was still law? Right, well the state has a duty to tell you this. The state has a duty to tell you what the laws are, and to make sure you know your human rights and your constitutional laws. None of you were taught. I wasn't taught at school. Right? So this is why we're in the position we're in, because actually most people seem to not know the law, not even their basic human rights, which is quite tragic really, because if you knew them, you'd be upholding them, and well, hey. But what's really tragic is it seems to be the ministers of Crown don't know them either, or if they do, they don't care about upholding them. But the message, and sorry I went on for a bit, but the message is, please everybody, you do have these rights. You can go on to www.legislation.gov.uk, there's a search bar, and you can type in, looking for all the different laws. But if you type in human rights, you'll see all the human rights laws that come up. Type in the Magna Carta, you'll get this coming up. Type in the Bill of Rights, and it's honestly not hard. These earlier laws are not hard to read. They're in Old English, but they're not hard to read. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you can Google it, it's dead easy to read. And what I've been saying to people is, print these off. You know, you don't need to remember them or learn them. Just print them off. And well, you know, if you go in somewhere and someone says, I want to derogate from your rights to life, I want you to wear a mask, I want you to be tested, I want you to do whatever. Say, what gives you the right? These are my rights. And that would be a start. Because at the moment, people are getting away with doing all of this because nobody knows how to fight back. So I'll be here, do ask lots of questions. I am trying to get a lot of the material out so that people can see it for references, but you know, it's just me, and I haven't got there quite yet. So thank you for listening.
I'm pleased you're on our side. Fantastic, that was so informative, and you gave us great hope, I think. We need to know our law, we need to know our rights. Yeah, do our homework. Yeah. And the homework is what, 6 pages or something?
That's just one of them, but you know, it's fundamental. That chapter 29 basically is a catch-all. It says you don't get to be destroyed, you know, nor does your property, and certainly not your life.
Right, let's move on. David Kurten. David Kurten. David Kurten was born, you're not the local man, was born in Mid-Sussex, Sussex. Fantastic. In 1971, the son of a British mother and a Jamaican father, David was raised by a single mother and his maternal grandparents in Sussex. Well done. They did a good job.
Oh, thank you. I would say.
He studied for a BSc in chemistry at the University of St Andrews, graduating in 1993, before completing a PGCE for teaching at the University of Bath in 1995, and a Master of Research degree in Chemistry at the University of Southampton in 1998. He taught chemistry between 1995 and 2016 at schools in the UK, Botswana, Bosnia, Herzegovina, thank you, Bermuda and the United States. David is a British politician who has served as leader of the Heritage Party since September 2020. He previously was a member of the London Assembly from 2016 to 2021. I've seen some of your battles with Sadiq Khan. Yes. You did very well, thank you. Yeah. He was elected as a UKIP party candidate. He subsequently left the party in 2020. He characterises himself as social conservative. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know if you were going to thank me for being here, because actually for the first time in about 20 months I've got a cold. So I've been sniffling away here. So it's funny coming up on the train, because I sort of like sneeze, and then the people around would look at me like I'm a terrorist. All I'm doing is sneezing because I've got a cold. But the thing is, I didn't take a test, so I could be here tonight. I'm never going to take a test or anything like that. The best tweet I've seen in the last 18 months is by Ian Brown. You know, he said, no test, no track, no trace, no mask, no vax. I think that's brilliant. And that's what I do to fight the COVID regime. And I know some of you do as well, which is wonderful. But on that point, it's just so bizarre, I think, how people have been programmed in order to act and think and speak in a different way. And, for most of my life, I've just been minding my own business, taking everything at face value and just thinking, well, if people say something, then they mean what they say and so on. But I've started to notice in politics, particularly getting into politics, which I've been actively involved in since 2015, people don't always say what they think and what they mean. People sometimes try to deceive you. And they also try to make up ways of speaking, which I find quite disturbing. And when I was on the London Assembly, I first got to hear about something that TfL has. So TfL stands for Transport for London, and of course that's one of the things that the Mayor of London is in control of. And when I was there, I heard of something called a Behavioural Insights Unit. And what they do is they try to work out how to get people to behave in certain ways and act in a certain manner without them realising that they're even doing it. So they're trying to plug into your subconscious and unconscious mind in order to change your behaviour. Now this was just TfL, I'll move on from this in a minute. But one of the things I noticed, that you might have noticed as well, a couple of years ago, if you walk to London Bridge Station, and you walk up the escalators onto the platforms, they're platforms, was it 1 to 9 or something. A couple of years ago, there appeared this huge, angry yellow box, and it said, "No waiting," in big capital letters. And the effect of that was, I suppose, to try to encourage people not to wait at the top of the escalators because they had a problem with that. But I just noticed it was very, very striking when it first happened that someone had decided, in order to try to get people not to do that, they would make a huge angry yellow letters and paint them on the floor all over the platform. And that's just one example of what these behavioural insights people do. But of course we all know with the COVID situation, behind the mainstream media, which is always trying to manipulate our minds and everything using neuro-linguistic programming and language and so on, then you've got the government, and behind them lies SAGE, and many of the people on SAGE are behavioural psychologists. And there's all these new, there's almost a whole new vocabulary that has grown up, and sometimes it's very, very difficult to counter that vocabulary, rebut that vocabulary in a way that will not let them come back and attack you very, very quickly and easily. And that's what they do. So we often have a battle of words in debating and in politics, but this has gone beyond politics into the media and into wider society. And one of the key phrases I find that I hear people using all the time, and Sadiq Khan used to do this because he was a big propagandist and promoter of the vaccines, which I don't call vaccines, but more of that later. But he would say they are safe and effective, and I completely disagree with that. And I actually asked him one time in the London Assembly, look, Mr. Mayor, you said these vaccines are safe and effective, but how can you say they're safe when there's not been any long-term testing done because they've only been invented a few months ago? And how do you know the long-term effects, particularly on pregnant women and women of childbearing age? And he kind of launched into some pre-prepared answer and ended up saying, we need to listen to experts, not conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers, which are two other phrases that get thrown out at me and people like us maybe all of the time. And I was thinking, how do you counter these? Because you need to counter these phrases because they're very powerful phrases. When someone accuses you of being an anti-vaxxer, like I don't mind myself, it just, it's like water off a duck's back to me. But it does affect millions and millions of other people around who we need to bring over to our side, and they are also affected by this, and they don't want to be called an anti-vaxxer because they're scared of being labelled as something which the media, the government, the behavioural psychologists will try to paint you as someone who's crazy and not worth talking to and whose opinion is worth nothing if they're labelled as an anti-vaxxer. So I was trying to think about how I would do this, and the first thing, of course, is that I never refer to these experimental injections as vaccines. I always call them experimental or injections of experimental mRNA in the case of the Pfizer and the Moderna virus, or a genetically modified chimpanzee adenovirus in the case of the AstraZeneca one. And I seem to get away with this on social media because they're always looking for anyone who says vaccine, and you often get a ban or something, or you get kicked off these social media platforms if you say anything about vaccines. But I seem to get away with actually saying what on earth I like about experimental injections. So you look at my Twitter feed, it's a bit spicy, but there you go, you can, and that's a good way around it. Now, I would say that I am not an anti-vaxxer. I am not against the scientific principle of a vaccine, which is that when someone is exposed to a weakened or deadened or attenuated pathogen, it trains your immune system to recognise a stronger pathogen when you come into contact with it. And as I was a science teacher, I used to teach kids all about Edward Jenner and the story of him inoculating a small boy against smallpox with cowpox. But that was a pure, weaker version. Cowpox is a weaker version of smallpox, effectively. But that was a pure pathogen, which was weaker, but it wasn't mixed with all of the other gunk that you get in the syringes that gets injected into you. So I think there are, to counter these phrases, you need to really speak quite intelligently And if you speak scientifically, then the sort of media interviewers won't actually know how to come back at you. And because I've got a science background, I haven't actually been invited onto any mainstream media platforms to talk about it. I wonder why they don't want me on. I think, I'd sort of have them for breakfast. I'd like to go on sometime and talk to some of these Dr. Hillary or whatever. Dr. Hillary, if you're watching, let's go, you and me, let's debate. Piers Morgan, who said that anti-vaxxers are spineless, there's something, I don't want to say the word, but it's something like a cat. But he said, so we're like spineless. I want to be polite here because the cameras are rolling, but we're spineless basically. So Piers Morgan, let's go, let's debate all about vaccines from a scientific point of view, and the fact that these COVID injections that we're getting are not actually vaccines, they're experimental mRNA. But there's also other things that we need to question as well, which I think are legitimate questions that we should be able to ask and hypothesize scientifically without being cancelled and shut down and thrown out of debates. And that is, are these experimental injections of mRNA and chimpanzee adenovirus causative to the serious adverse health effects that we're seeing, the myocarditis, the pericarditis, the blood clots, the strokes, the sudden deaths, the Bell's palsy, the Guillain-Barré syndrome? Are they causative? We need to ask this question. And simply asking a scientific question like that does not make you an anti-vaxxer, it makes you a scientist. So and then stop smearing people who simply ask, come up with hypotheses and ask about these things. Another question that we need to ask, and I would never have considered asking this before a year and a half ago, because I never even questioned vaccines at all. But another question we have to ask is, are the adjuvants and the chemicals in the syringes that go along with the vaccine, such as aluminium salts, mercury salts, emulsifiers, preservatives, and tissue from cell lines from aborted unborn children, are they having a detrimental effect on people's health if they get injected with them? That's a reasonable question to ask. I don't think it's wrong to ask that, and it's not something that I've heard anybody really ask, because there are so many other things in these syringes. We don't even know the contents, the full contents of the injections, the COVID experimental injections that we're getting. If you try to take a vial and analyse it, it's almost like you're trying to rob Fort Knox. They don't want anyone to actually get one so they can analyse them themselves. But I think some people are starting to do that now, and some of the reports I've heard are not particularly good about what actually might be in them. So those are the things that I think we should ask, particularly as they are running down through the age ranges, and we know this is happening because, first of all, last year it was 15 million jabs to freedom, wasn't it? Just jab the elderly. I don't know why they're picking on the elderly, but they would jab the elderly and the vulnerable, and then we could be free. But then it was not 15 million, then it was everyone over 50, then over 40, then over 21, then over 18, 16. Now they're coming for our kids, and in America you've got Dr. Fauci wanting to jab 5 to 11-year-olds, and then you've got some places even talking about jabbing toddlers with these things, which are clearly experimental, and we do not know their long-term safety effects. So we've got to speak out about this and actually say, no, you're not going to inject our kids with these things because we don't know what's in them.
Yay.
And when the media does a hatchet job on all the people who are heroes, in my view, and freedom fighters standing outside schools and so on, trying to warn children, or just simply say to them, make sure you have informed consent before you take them. That's not too much to ask, is it? If you want to have them, fine, go ahead and have them. I wouldn't recommend it, but if that's what you want to do, take them. But if you shouldn't be coerced into doing it, and I think it's absolutely appalling that I've heard in some schools people are being made to feel like they're second-class citizens if they don't take a jab, and in some places they're now being given yellow stickers to put on them, which I think is absolutely appalling. People don't really have much memory of history there. But this is going on around the world. The other thing is, the other phrase that people use and throw at us is conspiracy theorist. Well, there's the old joke, well it's not an old joke now, it's probably a new joke, is what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and a fact? Well, it's about 6 months. You know that one, because, you know, I was speaking out and Neil and many other people were speaking last year and saying, look, these vaccine passports are coming. And some people would say, no, that's just a conspiracy theory, that's not going to happen here. And it's happening, and it's happening all around the world. And after that, people were saying, well, there's going to be quarantine camps and so on to put people who are unvaccinated in. And well, that's ridiculous. That's a crazy conspiracy theorist. They built huge ones all over Australia. And I don't know if they've built them here in this country. I don't think so. Well, there's Wellingborough. I don't know if that's just a normal prison extension or not. I don't know. But we'll see what happens with that. But in other countries, they are building them as well. So this is conspiracy theory to actual fact is going on. We know what the plan is, and we've got to wake up people to not get this digital identity. And I caused a bit of a stir today by saying on social media that I declined an invitation to speak at a conference next month where entry was only with the NHS COVID pass. And at the moment, you see, they're not making the injections mandatory for everybody in England, unless you're unfortunate enough to be a care home worker, in which case you'd be thrown out of your jobs if you don't have a vaccine, or they're going to do it to NHS staff later on. But what they are trying to do is just get people used to the digital identity system, which is the NHS COVID pass. And you're finding it, they're using it in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland now to get into sports venues and large venues, but it's also creeping in England as well, with businesses just doing it of their own volition, even though it's not required by law in England that you have to do it. But I absolutely point blank refuse to speak at any venue which requires people to have an NHS COVID pass. I won't do it myself, and I won't ask people to do it to come and listen to me. I think that's absolutely wrong. So that's something about the just political debate. Of course, Chris mentioned there, I'm the leader of the Heritage Party, so I'm trying to make a difference with the Heritage Party in the political sphere, because I think all the old parties are complicit with the COVID regime, the globalist regime, the World Economic Forum, whatever you call it. And so I'm standing myself in the by-election next week in Old Bexley and Sidcup, so I'm hoping this would be amazing, wouldn't it? If we wake up on Friday morning and I'm an MP. That would be so fantastic. I'd love to do that. I'd sort them out, I'll tell you. Okay. So the election's on Thursday. I'm hoping for a good result. We're doing everything we can to get a good result there. And we've also got a great candidate, James Elliott, standing in the North Shropshire by-election as well. So we're continuing to build because I think we need an alternative politically. So we're trying to work within the system we've got. I know some people are trying to create new systems, which I think is great, but we also need to try to work within the system we have, because that's what we have at the moment, and we've got to try to break into that with a new party. It's tough in this country with the first past the post system, but we've got to go for it. If you don't try, you won't succeed, and I'm very much hoping that we will succeed and we'll be able to get a bridgehead into Parliament, and then we'll be able to start agitating to get some of these terrible laws removed and restore our fundamental freedoms and make sure this situation never ever happens again.
Thank you very much, David. Absolutely wonderful. We wish you so well with your election campaign. Wouldn't it be a refreshing change to have a straight-talking politician? Right, moving on. Dr. Neil Mcrae. Dr. Neil Mcrae is a researcher and educator in mental health.
Just a moment. One of my friends has been live streaming it, and he said it's cut out now. I don't know whether anyone can.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Yes, Neil is a researcher and educator in mental health nursing at King's College London. His research interests include depression, dementia, and the influence of social media on mental health. Clearly all these subjects are relevant to our topic tonight. Author of three books, The Moon and Madness, Echoes from the Corridors, The Story of Nursing in British Mental Hospitals, and Moralitis, A Cultural Virus. So let's hear it from Neil, please.
Thank you for that, Chris. Just a slight update. I'm no longer at King's College London. I'm now working for the trade union, the Workers of England. And just to add another little bit to my biography, never tested, never tracked, never marked, never tracked. And now people are beginning to understand why I don't carry a smartphone. But it's important to say that we need everyone, whether jabbed or not, to join our movement and to join us in our common battle for humanity. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to focus on the morality, or rather the immorality, of the COVID regime. For 11 years, I sat on an NHS ethics committee. All the standards and safeguards that we upheld are now disregarded. Informed consent, vital for any medical intervention, particularly for an experimental intervention. Transparency. Conflicts of interest should be declared and scrutinised. For example, are there financial incentives? And perhaps most importantly, participants' safety and well-being. Regulatory bodies, which exist to protect us, have been corrupted by the COVID narrative and by the jabbing frenzy. The yellow card system, introduced in 1964 after the thalidomide scandal, has become a problem for the authorities. Aware of public concern about reported adverse reactions to the COVID vaccine, June Rain, head of the Medicines Regulatory Authority, casts doubt on the validity of yellow card reports. She says, as we don't know how many are fake, we can't know how many are genuine. Yet this is a system that we rely on as a signal of risks and harm. Thalidomide was tested by the manufacturer, it was approved, but without adequate long-term monitoring. Pregnant women to whom GPs doled out the drug for morning sickness gave birth to badly deformed babies. How quickly we unlearn the lessons of the past. Almost 800 miscarriages have been reported on yellow card. But this is surely a tiny proportion of the true number. A distressed woman may not think of submitting a report. Many people are unaware of the yellow card system, while doctors seem reluctant to attribute any adverse event to the vaccine. June Rain has nothing to say about this. She has launched no investigation into any indicators of vaccine harm. Just get the jab, government ministers implore, after committing vast sums of public money to vaccine supplies for the population 6 times over. They obviously intend this so-called pandemic to go on for years, with 6 monthly boosters. All this for a respiratory infection with a mortality rate similar to influenza. We know of occasional deadly outbreaks, such as the Hong Kong flu of 1968, but potency fluctuates from year to year, and we're normally blissfully ignorant of the heavy toll, apart from headlines of a winter bed crisis in the NHS. I remember in my psychiatric nurse training, my placement on a dementia ward, a bad flu killed 7 out of the 24 patients. I got a nasty bout of it too. There was no quarantine, PCR tests, masks, or one-way corridors on the ward. They'd have made no difference. The fit and healthy can be debilitated by flu too. I found an old football programme in a second-hand shop with a very interesting manager's comment at Darlington Football Club. He said, "As if we didn't have enough problems on our hands, the flu epidemic descended on us with a vengeance to bring 1972 to a horrible end. First, we lost 7-0 at Bradford when the flu was just beginning to make itself felt. We had to play Alan Harding even though he was injured. And finally, we had to postpone the next 2 games against Workington and Lincoln. At one time, we had 6 players down with flu, which meant we couldn't possibly field a team. And the Darlington players were evidently still suffering because, according to the programme holder's pen, they lost 7-0 again. But life went on. The ill stayed in bed for a week, the vulnerable elderly for longer, and sadly, thousands of them fell to the culminating condition of pneumonia, traditionally known as the old man's friend. The COVID regime, by contrast, doesn't want life to go on. Early in the crisis, or contrived crisis, they promoted the new normal. They are exploiting fear, using COVID, as they have tried with climate change, to bring in an elite-led, post-democratic, post-liberty world of cyber surveillance. A technocracy in which ordinary people will have little freedom and little choice. Ethics will be a thing of the past. There will be no choice over what chemicals get pumped into your body. But are we not there already? I just saw this quote in a book on the way over tonight on the train. And Austria, well, it's certainly not all Edelweiss, is it? Professor Richard Parnkert of Karl Franz University said recently, he said, page 38, here it is, he said, "Global warming deniers will never admit their mistake, and as a result, they should be executed." Perhaps it would be the only way to stop the rest of them. The death penalty would have to be justified in terms of the enormous number of saved future lives. Edelweiss. In my new role, I'm an officer of the Workers of England Trade Union and representing hundreds of care workers against the no job. Privileged middle-class managers and HR bureaucrats are sacking lower social class, poorly paid women who worked through the COVID contagion. And this is not simply following the law. Workers who have submitted an exemption for health reasons, complying with the Act, are still dismissed. This is an ethical problem that threatens to destroy our society. Care workers are being kicked out, not because they're biohazards, but for reasons that are ideological and social. Ethical concerns seem to dissipate when the person before them is regarded as a misinformed and dangerous dissident, an anti-vaxxer who deserves no sympathy. Let us remember that in Nazi Germany, it was the professional classes that supported the regime most enthusiastically. I'd like to end with this question. If you support the mass vaccination program, where would you draw the line in its implementation? My line was crossed when the first improperly tested mRNA agent was injected into a naive citizen's arm. And the rest will be history.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Neil. Very thoughtful. I'd like to just add a little explainer that we did weeks and months ago. We did actually invite an opposition panel. You know, wanted people to try and defend the government. And the result is here. I need say no more. You know, I invited all of the Sussex MPs, Conservative ones. Invited the Sussex NHS Health and Safety Trust. I invited all the local town councillors. No one. It speaks volumes, doesn't it? They can't defend the indefensible. Okay. I'm now like to move to question and answer session, the most exciting part of the meeting. And I'd just like to read out one of the emails, many emails that I received. And this is from a lady called Susie. And she said that she would be attending tonight. You don't have to make yourself known if you're here, but if you do want to, obviously feel free to do so. Myself and my two daughters work frontline for the NHS. We have seen through the lies and the coercion, but feel vulnerable as we are in a minority amongst the staff who believe in the jabs. The threat is looming that we will be sacked the 2nd of February as we refuse the vaccine. We have vaccine control cards, exemption and probing forms. We're members for Workers for England Union. Have seen Anna Buissieret's videos regarding asking for a risk assessment for the jab. I'm bank staff, so I guess they'll just refuse to give me shifts, so they don't even have to sack me. Susie, are you here? Would you like to?
Yeah, she's here.
Ah. Would you like to say a few words? We can get a mic to you.
Hello there, yes, I'm just, my frustration is my family, two of my daughters work for the NHS and myself. My youngest daughter, she was a care worker, she was going to be sacked, so the whole family is in the care industry. So it's just a real threat for us. Luckily she's changing jobs, so she will not be in that situation. The old Workers' Greenwood Union, they've been amazing for my youngest. Agreed.
Let's hear it for the Workers' Union. Well done.
Yeah.
Do you have a question for the panel?
I just wondered if there's anything we can do to. I watched Anna's video. It's very useful to sort of see. It was very useful to see Anna's video about what we have to do to stand up and ask for risk assessment. But I'm just concerned from my point of view that being bank staff, they'll just say, sorry, there's no shifts for you. But this jab situation affects my whole family. So, it's very, very real.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat, that's the wrong way. Well, of course, we can't predict how an employer is going to respond in each particular case. But you're right, I am hearing that, people who won't comply, let's put it that way, of being given back office jobs, or in the military, for example, they're being told they can't be deployed, etc. But ultimately, as I explained in the video, the employment contract cannot be unilaterally changed, and that would include changing your jobs, unless they're going to pay you the same and give you the same conditions, and you consent to that. So if you agree that you don't mind going in the back office and for the same pay, and that means you don't have to be put through all of that stuff, then you could consent to that change if you wanted to. But the point being, they don't get to unilaterally impose these changes on you. And if they do, then obviously that's a breach of contract. That's a fundamental breach of contract. What employers cannot do is downgrade you or pay you less or put you under worse terms and conditions. And obviously if they do, as I've said to people, do not resign. At most, or rather at worst, you'd have to go to the employment tribunal, but that's where Neil and the wonderful Workers for Union, hopefully he wouldn't get that far, because of course what we're finding here is that, employers will back down again if you take them to task, and as I say, that the individual risk assessment is key, because that focuses both the employee and the employer on what risks are actually going to happen here, and it is an individual risk because we're not all the same. So of course when employers get to that point, particularly if they do actually go ahead and give the risk assessment and then there's the occupational health report, if you have a decent position, they will be duty bound to say what the material risks of these things are, and then that in handwriting, in written form in front of employers, line managers, etc., that often starts to change the narrative. So it may not go as far as losing your job. So that's the other thing. The whole idea about these employment disputes is that you find the resolutions to them. And at the moment, we're in the early stages of all of this. But that in other jurisdictions abroad, these mandates have been ruled to be unlawful. Employees who have been put on sick leave have been, been told that they can go back to work and they get their back pay paid back. So, that's why I say to people, don't assume that this is all going to end up in the worst situation. We have got time to fight back and hopefully conciliate.
Anything to add?
Just a brief addition to that. In fact, very few individual risk assessments have been done for the members that we're representing. Our first priority is to get in the medical exemption. We can't change the law, the employers themselves can't change the law, but the law does provide for exemptions. It has to, because of the Equality Act. So medical exemptions is a way to put a brake on dismissal. Now, many workers say to me, but I'm pretty fit and healthy, or they've read about excessively stringent criteria for medical exemptions. But often they'll say, well, I don't really have a condition that I can claim. And I say, well, what's your reasons for not wanting to take the vaccine? And then everything they tell me is to do with their health, the risks to their health. So everyone has a medical exemption.
Yeah. on religious exemptions, because obviously for those people who don't want aborted fetal cells, etc. And I personally, believe in God, and I believe in my God-given immune system. So, and ultimately, you simply have the right to say no, to refuse treatment, and that's set out in case law. You have the right to say no, even if it's going to kill you by saying no. So you don't actually have to give a reason, and part of this demanding exemptions, of course, is a breach of your, privacy and confidential information. So whilst I agree there's a medical exemption, the other exemption is no, I don't consent.
Thank you very much. Moving on, I can see an arm up in the back in the corner there. Roving reporter, can we get to him, please?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Nigel Jacklin. I'm working with the Together Declaration. We started in that we've asked people who signed the declaration who work for the NHS if they would like to join an active support group. So far we've got about 1,200 NHS workers who want to help. We haven't broadcast the request, so maybe we can talk. What people are saying is that in your job as a nurse, you explain to patients why they may or may not want to have a treatment. And it's absolutely disgusting that you have not been given that respect. Medical consent is your right to choose whether or not you have a vaccination. We haven't done the advice yet. I think it will be in the first instance if you have a union, ask your union rep what they're going to do. In the second instance, join the Workers of England Union, who we'll be talking to. I think if you have taken a decision not to be vaccinated, this doesn't change your decision, does it? So don't get vaccinated. And then hopefully we'll tell them to drop it.
Thank you for that. Any other questions, please? Put your arms up. Yes, lady there, please.
Hello, particularly a question for David and Dr. McCrae. I know it seems not as important as what's being stuck into people's bodies at the moment, but I've posed this question to the UK column and several legal people as to why no one is really picking up on the fact that behavioural insights is not a recognised profession in this country. So when these people are called to account, they won't be able to be prosecuted for being in the behavioural insights and psychology profession, because it's not a recognised profession in this country. So, and nobody seems to be really understanding how relevant that is.
Thanks for that. That's a very good point. It's not something that I'd thought of before, but I certainly think that everybody who's involved with trying to change our society in a way that we haven't consented to, or even without our knowledge, should be held to account for that. I don't know what law you would use to do that. Maybe that's something Anna could speak about for us.
Dealings with the police where they have raised this issue regarding a stalker who works in behavioural insights, that's his business. And they said even if it got to court, because that's not a recognised profession in this country as it is in the United States, the fact that that was his job could not be taken into account in a court of law. That's what the police told me. So I'm just wondering.
The great lawyers that they are.
Well, yes, that's quite a major point. If that's then applying to behavioural insights all across the country and the world.
Yeah, no, I don't know where he's coming from that point of view, because firstly the behavioural insights team does include qualified psychologists, and they're governed, regulated by the British Psychological Society, and they have a code of conduct which includes, conducting their practice ethically. And in fact, I don't know if you've all heard of Gary Sidley. He's a senior psychologist with HEART, the Health Advisory Research Team, and he and a group of psychologists wrote to the British Psychological Society some months ago, challenging the British Psychological Society and saying, why haven't you intervened with these people who are qualified and therefore regulated by you? And they've given very poor responses. In fact, I've got the detail in here, you can read it later, where they quote the methods and means of psychological warfare that's being conducted on the population and holding them to account, because it does breach the code of ethics that they're supposed to practice under. But in terms of the legal position, we're all equal under the rule of law, no one is above it. And we are all living men and women acting as whatever job we're doing. So regardless of what their job title is, those people on Spy B, that memo from the 22nd of March, which said 2020, which said we have to increase people's perception of fear, and they did, and now we have the figures to show how many people have committed suicide, and that 60% of our children are now suffering with mental health problems. They did a good job. Now, going back to the war conventions, as I say, means and methods of warfare are not unlimited. And one act of prohibited warfare is conducting a terror campaign. You don't get to conduct a terror campaign, again, even in wartime. So these people will be held individually liable in their personal capacity, civil and criminally liable for the damage they have caused from their strategy and their messaging and their advice. And they will be held to account. So I don't know where this police officer gets the idea that anybody cannot be prosecuted, because, as I say, every single person can be, and those who are perpetrating must be, because we must root out this, criminal behaviour from our society. We can't tolerate it. So, yeah, the police have got an idea.
Yeah, just a very quick addition to that. I think that the Nuremberg trials, which must happen, there should be a media section, including the bent opinion pollsters, a health professional section, including the care home managers, a police and criminal justice section, including both the thugs in uniform and their commanders, and a civil servants section, including the nudge unit, and finally, best of all, the politicians section.
They tried the judges as well, and the lawyers, so, none of us are left off. In every profession there are perpetrators, aiders and abettors and complicit, so...
Right, all lots of hands are going up, this is good, that's what we want to see. Gentleman in the first row, hand up.
I just wanted to say...
Just wait for the mic, John. Thanks.
Why don't they just change things to the way that they want it? The same way as the vaccine wasn't a vaccine, and then they changed the definition so it is a vaccine. Why don't they just change things around the way they want things? And how can we stop that?
Well, if you're talking about politicians, that they can make whatever laws they want to in Parliament. We need to get good people in Parliament. So, as I say, I'm trying to do that, but this is like a marathon, not a sprint, and it's like climbing a mountain. But hopefully many of you will come join me as well and join in the fight to change the people that we've got in Parliament, because I think we need to sweep away the vast majority of those 650 that are there.
Well, David, I would say they can't make any laws they like, because it has to be by consent, right? And it specifically says in the Coronation Oath that they uphold the laws as consented to. So these laws that are derogating from our rights and are actually criminally unlawful, just because they've made them in Parliament doesn't mean that they're law, right? Yeah. So that's something else to understand, because obviously Acts of Parliament get repealed, and also, as I say, if you don't consent, then it's not lawful. and consent is being obtained unlawfully because of the psychological warfare. So the evidence from the experts that we're working with who have analysed the messaging being used and, for example, the media content aimed at children, etc., and their expert opinion is not a single person in the country is capable of giving their freely informed consent to these coronavirus measures due to the psychological operations that have been conducted upon them. Now that means that nobody is consenting lawfully. That's very serious.
Right, next question, please. Yeah, gentleman on the left, please.
It seems very, very clear from listening to the panel that we have a serious problem going on at the moment. The question is how we're going to sort it out. It could be the legal route, and let's hope that that's one possible way. But in the end, surely it is going to be political, and we do need to clear out what we call in Parliament and replace it with some worthy people like yourself, David. Thank you for doing what you're doing for us. However, you are one of, unfortunately, you are not the only independent party. And if we are to clear out the usual crowd, the Liberals, the Conservatives and Labour, do we not have to have a unified resistance to that, including yourself and maybe other notable characters such as Richard Tice, or do you think maybe he's also one of the system?
I get asked this question very, very often, and I don't want to say too much about the other parties and so on. What I would say is that no one was doing anything about this for the first 6 months of the coronavirus situation. And then I set the Heritage Party up. I was working on this from the beginning and doing a lot of groundwork, and I set this up because I thought we needed something to challenge this, and there's nothing happening. But then just a couple of days after I launched the Heritage Party, then the Reclaim Party was launched, and then a few weeks later, then Richard Tice popped up and said, oh, we're going to reactivate the Brexit Party again, even though they'd sort of deactivated it for a long time. So, I mean, all I would say at the moment is it's disappointing that some other people didn't come and join me, but they set up their own things after me and then seem to copy what I'm saying, which happens. You know, the other day I started, you know, I used the phrase medical apartheid. I have done for a while, and then one of the other people there that you mentioned started saying that just after I was saying it. So, you know, obviously I'm having an influence on that. But you know, I can't give you an answer at the moment that you might like to have, that we'd all sort of join one big party. I don't think that's where we're going, because, you know, the Heritage Party, I mean, I'll give these out later. I mean, these are our leaflets and so on. We got a full manifesto. I set us up actually to be a socially conservative party, but then freedom has become the biggest issue over the last 18 months. Of course, you know, getting back our fundamental freedoms, which should never have been taken away, because they're part of our heritage, the heritage we have from common law, which goes back centuries and centuries. But I think that there's some similarities with some other people, but there's some differences as well. What I'd say is we're a fully grassroots party. We're funded totally by members and small donors, whereas the other ones, some of them, you know, one of them has a big. All the finances are on the Electoral Commission's website. So, Reclaim got £1.5 million in donations in the first 6 months of this year from one person, Jeremy Hoskins, who's an ex-Tory donor. So that's how they're funded. Reform seems they had nearly £500,000 in loans from something called Tyson Investments Limited. And it's all on the Electoral Commission's website. So that seems to be how they're funded. So we're funded in a different way, but we're building a grassroots party with members, trying to have local branches get together and actually be a real party, you know, in sort of true sense of the word. So we'll see how things go as time goes on. But you know, You can see North Shropshire, the by-election, the Heritage Party standing, Reclaimers standing, Reformers standing, the Freedom Alliance is standing, all in the same by-election. So, you know, that doesn't make sense. But I hope, you know, that maybe people will come and join us in the Heritage Party. We'll see what happens. Then, yeah.
Right, next question. Yes, the lady there sitting down, just there.
Yeah, I wonder what we could all do en masse to try to make a difference more quickly. So, for example, the day after the announcement about the NHS mandating vaccines, I phoned the police, which I thought we should all be doing, to report a crime against humanity, and I quoted the Statute of Rome, etc. And they just said, oh, this isn't a police matter. And I said, yes it is. They said, no, phone your local councillor. I said, I've already done that, they're not interested. And nor was the MP. And they said, no, it's definitely not a police matter. And I said, of course it is. And, you know, continued to talk about that and took the person's name and number and said that I would be passing their name to the group of lawyers who were putting together the court cases against them, and that they would have to answer for this, that they were liable. But, you know, my idea was that we should all, you know, if, for example, we said on this day at this time, we all go to our local police station and queue up to make police reports about crimes against humanity, just because we're doing all this, you know, they keep bringing things in, they're sneaking things in, and, you know, before we know it, they're already down to kids at age, you know, like little be 5-year-olds. You know, Boris met with the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday. Well, they're doing kids age 12. I'm sure they were discussing that. You know, as we go on trying to fight it, it's all being sneaked in, and it's all, we're not changing things quick enough to stop things before they get into a very, very dangerous level.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how many of you are aware that there were around 30,000 criminal complaints filed earlier in the year. I think that was through the Freedom Programme and Guardian's 300. So there was a mass campaign for that. The police rejected them all, saying that it was basically complaining about politicians, so take it up with your politicians, which is a bit like a rape victim being told to go back to the rapist to try and sort it out. Yeah. So we did some more digging, and I've been working with Mark Sexton, the former policeman, and as you know, met with Sir Graham Brady, and done some other investigation with a whole load of police who are whistleblowing, etc. And it seems to be that there is a unwritten policy not to accept any claims alleging such crimes throughout the force. Now, that's been confirmed through several sources, and those people have been trying to report them, including myself, at various places. The latest that we have on that is that there are some police who are now waking up, and some of them have been helping communities serve the notices of liability. And indeed, I met a policeman last couple of weeks ago in Reading, and I said to him, you know that we're serving notices of liability, because the police forces have been served with notices of liability, again, months ago, in fact I think about a year ago. And his response was, good, they all need to wake up. So more of them are. Now the issue is that when Mark put his criminal complaint in, even though he put in 1,200 pages of evidence, personally when I looked at it, I could see why they might have said that wasn't enough. He felt that it was, because he was a policeman used to preparing those cases. What we now have on board is a policeman who, he's retired, and that's what he used to do, serious high-level criminal investigations. So he has the expertise to put together a packet of evidence that does meet the required standard. I'm pretty sure Mark did, but this guy's going to have another go. But yeah, things have moved on from then. More and more police have woken up, more of them have left. Apparently, a lot of them are very, very unhappy, suffering with mental health problems, etc. themselves. So I think I agree. Everybody who knows that somebody has been injected without their informed consent or has been harmed in any other way that amounts to a criminal offence, then yes, we have a duty to report it. And if everybody was turning up regularly at the police and filming it and handing over evidence, there comes a point, doesn't there? Who knows when it will be, but we have to do that.
Anna, in one of your videos you mentioned police crime reference number.
Sorry, oh yes. Yeah.
So if we know that number, can we give that to the police so that we know, so that they can see what it's all about?
Yes, well, Mark Sexton was initially given, I think, 1 or 2 crime reference numbers and was promised that they would be followed up, but the outcome of that was to say, no, we're not going to do anything. I know a family, I don't know them personally, but I know a family has obtained a crime reference from their child dying from this injection. And I know that other families are trying to get crime references for similar offences. But you're right, if we have these if people are able to get crime references, then obviously we can piggyback on the back of the ones they are able to get hold of.
Do you have one? Do you have the one that you mentioned in the video?
That was that the one from Mark Sexton's? Did
No.
I mention whether? Well, it would either be the Mark Sexton crime reference, in which case I have, but as I say, they've chosen to close it, but we could try and get them to reopen it. I haven't got one from that
3 weeks ago, the video.
Yeah, that would have been the Mark Sexton ones then, the crime reference numbers he gave me. But, you know, we're working on this in terms of trying to either get that reopened, because they didn't do a proper investigation, or, as you say, flooding them with more until we can get some. But yeah, unfortunately, the intel is that their policy is not to accept these crimes.
Sorry, just to finish off, the lady's question, because I think this might answer some other people's questions as well, is what can we all do to change this situation that we're in? And I'm sure most of you will have heard of the Stand in the Park the group. Let's be honest, if you're still standing in the park, you're in the wrong place. You should be in your shopping centres. Stand in the Park is for wimps. We need to be out there in the high street. And I've been a member of a very, very successful local group. A couple of them are here tonight. The Carshalton Resistance, we're known as. And we're out on Carshalton High Street, suburbs of London, twice a week, Thursday evening, Sunday lunchtime, every single week. We've been there since the beginning of the year, and it's really making a difference. The amount of support from passing traffic is amazing, and I think a sign of the effect it's having is our local MP, who is beginning to say quite a lot of stuff about how good it is to jab kids. We haven't heard a squeak from him for months. He knows we're onto him.
I think you make a very good point there that it's all well and good having these large national demonstrations up in London, big crowds, that gets a message out there, but local engagement, we really need to focus on that now. Absolutely right. Okay, thank you for that. Right, next question. Yeah, please, gentlemen, just there.
First of all, I've got a question to you. Who's funding these people? And I'll have a follow-up question to that. Please go through that.
Well,
Some gun, some not.
hang on, I'll just read David Icke's book and I'll just try and find out. These people will never know.
No, exactly. The answer is different to what you think I'm asking.
Well, I hope you can enlighten us, but the public face of these crimes against humanity, like Bill Gates and Tony Fauci, these are not the people who are really running the show. And this has always been the way of this global cabal. And, well, David knows a lot about this.
Yeah, it's me. I mean, I know as much as anybody else. We see the big people, we see the pharmaceutical companies, we see the foundations which have billions of pounds, but I think there's people behind that as well. That you just don't. They're the people that you never see the front faces. You only see, you see George Soros, you see Bill Gates, you see Anthony Fauci, but you don't see the people with the real serious money. I mean, you think they got serious money, there are other people. But you know, what I'd say on that is that some people I talk to still think that this is just people messing up. This is just, you know, a cock up. Yeah, it's just people saving face. I mean, seriously, this is happening in lockstep all around the world, moving, doing the same things at the same time. It's obviously coordinated by people, you know, either the World Economic Forum or people behind that too.
We're pointing at the puppets, aren't we?
Yeah, some of them are probably puppets, some of them maybe not, but certainly some of them are.
So my follow-up question or answer is us. We are funding them. And how are we doing that? How are we doing that? We are paying taxes. Why are we paying taxes? Are they legal?
No.
So anybody who's paying taxes needs to know why they're illegal. It's down to the secretary, it's down to our straw man, it's about recognising who we are, and whenever a letter comes into your post box and you think it's to you, it's not addressed to you, it's addressed to a Mr. or a Ms. or a Mrs. And when we know, when we fully understand this, then we will lawfully be stopping our taxes, because that's what we should all do once you understand what it's all about. Would you agree?
Yes.
Are you referring to common law training?
No, I'm referring to Secretary. Secretary is the straw man. So we all believe when we have letters from the council saying please pay your taxes, Mr. Full Caps, they're not actually referring to you, the man, the living man. They're referring to the straw man, and that person is a person, and a person is a corporation. If you look in Black's Law, section issue 4, is that not true?
Yeah, that's absolutely right in terms of, you know, our legal fiction and then us as a living, breathing human person. Yes, basically when you look at the fact that our taxes are meant to be for lawful purposes, in which case we're quite happy to pay them, you know, to pave the road, to support whatever we need to do. But when it comes to our money being used for illegal, unlawful purposes...
You got it, yeah.
You
So
know,
we're paying the councils, and they are spending the money on things that we're not happy with, funding wars, 30% going into the pension schemes, etc., funding the vaccine and COVID and 5G and all of these. If we're funding those, then surely individually every single person in this room who's paying taxes can actually have an influence. And if that's the case and you decide to stop your taxes, which I have, you're not in a war, you're just conditionally accepting and saying, please help me pay my taxes lawfully, I want you to help me, please can you answer these 3 simple questions? And of course they don't answer those because they can't. And if they do, they won't put a signature, a wet signature. So we all can make a very easy, okay, it may be fearful for some people because they're good little boys and girls and they've been brought up in the right way. As I was, I like to do things properly, do what I'm told. And the government says, pay your taxes. But now I realise that if I do pay my taxes, I'm acting unlawfully, illegally.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, well brought up. I mean, you know, I'm obviously not going to sit here and advocate that nobody should pay their taxes. But, however, you are right. You know, in criminal law, of course, you know, you are either the main perpetrator or you are aiding and abetting or you're complicit. So if you know that you're tax money is going off for illegal wars and you're happily paying it, then clearly, you've got to ask yourself what you're doing there. I have to talk between the lines then, but hopefully you get the message.
Thank you. An excellent question. Very important point you made. Thank you.
Priscilla's been waiting for ages. She has put her hand up every time.
Oh, yes. Priscilla at the back, please. Let's go to the back of the room now.
Hi, sorry, I just wanted to ask Dr. Neil, because I work for the NHS as well and I'm in the same situation. I'm facing dismissal because of an allergic reaction to the masks and I ended up in A&E. And my question to you is, we are trying to chase, and I know other colleagues trying to chase GPs to sign an exemption form, and we are coming to them with concerns about our health due to the jabs or to the masks and other issues. And they're just shutting us down because they have a list from God knows where that states they can only do an exemption form under these circumstances, and if you don't have any of these, they won't sign anything. So I was just wondering, you were talking about chasing that exemption so we could work or could continue with our lives. And my question is, do Workers for England actually help on that aspect? Because it's hard to find support in this and to navigate through it.
Well, I worked in healthcare all of my career, so this may seem slightly surprising advice to give. If you want an exemption for a no jab, no job mandate, don't go anywhere near your GP. And I'll explain why. Many of the members that I've been representing have got obvious health concerns, conditions that would make them, contraindications for the vaccine. History of cardiovascular disease, for example. Planning to have a baby, that's another one. And they've gone to their GP. Those that have actually managed to get an appointment, which is not easy these days, is it? Those that have actually managed to talk to the GP, this is, I can probably say 3 or 4 dozen cases of this, just in the people I'm representing. I've had a conversation with the GP, and the GP has said, I agree with you, you shouldn't take this vaccine, but I'm not going to put it in writing.
That's right.
I'm not going to give you an exemption. This is the extent of the corruption of the medical profession here in 2021. These doctors, like any professionals, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a medic, they pride themselves, professionals, on their esoteric independence, right? They don't just do what they're told to do, right? If they wanted to give you an exemption, they could. But such is a genuine, and I'm not standing up for that, I think it's inexcusable what GPs are doing in this situation. But a little bit of understanding is that the professional bodies, and it's the same in nursing, have made it very clear that any doctor that steps out of line will be in trouble. And for the same reason, very few doctors are filling in yellow card reports for adverse reactions to the vaccines. So my practical answer to your question would be spread the word. Do not take the intuitive step of going to see your GP. Join the Workers of England.
Yes.
We'll get your exemption for you.
Yes.
Are we going to Ram? Yeah, absolutely. Ram, go ahead.
Hi there. My main question is, you spoke about we're winning the battle. How do we win the war? When do we hold these people to account? When do we get them up in front of the jury or whatever? Lots of people are dying now. Kids are starting to die. How many more people got to die before people will go to account?
Thank you. I totally agree with you. What is the ultimate answer? Because unless we can convene courts tomorrow that we can trust, with grand juries in and haul these people in front of us, how do we get there? Right? So this is one of the things, because the lawful process is that you as a member of society, if you identify somebody in society who is killing others, typically you go along, you either have the police there or you yourself effect a lawful arrest. But the problem is, where do you then take that person to be detained and charged if the police won't detain them and charge them? And this is where we're at. So if anyone has a magical answer, I'm all ears. But, this is absolutely brilliant, genius way of stalling the democratic process, is for the police just to absolutely stonewall everyone, which is what's happening.
Aren't you allowed to commit a crime if it prevents a greater crime?
Well, that's for ultimately the courts to decide, and you're taking a risk clearly, because of course the obvious thing is you effect a lawful arrest, and then the police say that you've kidnapped, falsely imprisoned, etc. And then you've got a bun fight on your hands. So, the issue is that the word on the ground from an awful lot of people is that they are this close to becoming violent. And that's my concern. And when I met with Sir Graham Brady, I did say to him, we are looking at potentially civil war.
Yeah.
I'm not being funny, but I'll start on my feet before I live on my knees.
Well, increasing numbers of people are saying that, and clearly not just here, but abroad as well. But frankly, civil war, nobody wants it really, do they, frankly? So how do we get from being, holding on to our democratic lawful process while stopping crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide, and not go to civil war? And, we're here trying and trying and trying. I haven't got the answer. Sorry? What we all know is that there are people preparing for war. It's come out from other countries. They are, various people are preparing for war. And, when I've spoken to my military network, and to be honest, got freaked out, last time we had a civil war, 1 in 10 people were killed. Don't want to lose my fellow brothers and sisters. But, the word back from people is, well, none of us are in control of everybody, right? So people are going to take matters into their own hands, and history tells us that. And that's why it's so important to have a democratic process, so that we don't have to resort to violence. And indeed it says that in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says, whereas if men are not to resort to barbarous acts.
But it's failed, the democratic process is failing.
I agree.
Sorry, but the controllers want us to go to war. But we've got to be non-violent resistance.
Yeah.
Just have to be. They want chaos and destruction. They're expecting it now. They feed off us all. If the controllers mentioned it earlier, like whoever they are, again, Soros and all those people, they want war. And we have to stop war.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in a situation where war is being conducted on the civilian population by definition under the war conventions. Okay, so that's not an opinion. Unlawful acts of war are being committed on the civilian population. So arguably, are we already in a war? When most people say we're already in a war. So what we're talking about are levels of violence then. And, who wants violence? Nobody, frankly. Nobody wants violence. But I agree. Where are we with it all?
Sorry, can I recommend Jean Sharp's book, From Dictatorship to Democracy, and also Non-Violent Resistance, 198 Methods of Non-Violent Resistance. Everybody should read it, please.
Absolutely. Well, sorry, I'll just comment on that. The Serbian revolution, they use that as their blueprint for the Serbian revolution. And Extinction Rebellion are using it too. Right? Yeah, they say that so because the Serbian revolutionists set up these consultancies where they've been advising other countries about how to conduct a revolution, and you're absolutely right, Jean Sharp, From Dictatorship to absolutely spot on.
Right, next question. Let's go to the back.
Yeah.
Gentlemen.
I was able to stop my 13-year-old son from being vaccinated at school, and he have now his mother can now take him to a clinic with her signature. How can is there any way I can block that? I tried my GP. Apparently there's two systems of your information, and the vaccination centres use one. Is there any way I can have it so it comes up that I don't consent to this?
Oh, well, sorry, did I understand? So it's you and your other half, and one of your consent? Oh, okay.
And I don't talk to my son either.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all broken down.
Yeah.
But I just need, she can keep getting vaccinated. She's the sort of person that would vaccinate him just to spite me.
Yeah,
that's what
I'm afraid that's happening across the land, unfortunately. But basically, the Children's Act 1989 sets out very clearly that as a parent you have the right, duty and responsibilities, etc. of a parent in respect of your child. And the fact is, because this is a live human experiment, you do have to give your parental consent. This whole idea that they're saying parental consent is not required is not the law. And I refer you again to that Human Medicines for Human Use Clinical Trials Regulations 2004. It specifically says that the parent's consent must be obtained. So you are one of the parents, right? So the other parent cannot override on something like this legally.
Make that known to whoever's injecting him, or
well, you would have you written to the school already?
The school's done now. That's done and dusted.
They have buses outside schools now.
Oh, I see. Okay, they're doing it on
it's not
buses.
been done in the school, but and the catch-up clinic is for the kids that weren't vaccinated in school.
Yeah.
But they can use Gillick in the vaccine centres, and I phone up virtually every day, making out I want to vaccinate him, and then I say, oh well, maybe his mother's already done it. So, and at the moment he's not been done.
How old is he then?
13.
13. And there's no way that you can actually contact him and say, absolutely not, I do not give you my consent.
I've just come off police bail actually. I was arrested, she had me arrested and harassment. And all I've done is ask questions about my son. Yeah. And the solicitor said, this is ridiculous, she's choosing to ignore you.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is, but I can bribe him quite easily, £1,000 would do anything. But I can't actually get to make him that offer. But it's awful. It's really awful.
It is awful, and they can't use Gillick competence because that case of Bell and Tavistock that was decided at the end of last year specifically dealt with a situation where it was an experimental treatment, which although that case was about puberty blockers, this is an experimental treatment. And the point the court was making was that children cannot understand the fact that there aren't long-term consequences. They can't understand what it might mean not to be fertile and not be able to have a child. They might think at 13 or 14, I never want to get married, I don't want to have children, this is fine. 10 years later they do. So for all those reasons, the court was saying, it has to be parental consent. A child cannot be deemed Gillick competent when it's experimental, when it's no long-term safety data, when there are risks, serious risks, long-term risks. That was overturned slightly in that Bell and Tavistock, they said you had to apply to the court. It was in the appeal, they said, well actually it's unrealistic to go to court all the time, but you should be getting full parental consent with the GP, with the parents.
So would I go through my GP? Because my GP's not interested. They just passed me from one.
Who is your son's registered GP?
It's at Saxonbury House in Crowborough.
Right, well the registered GP, you can write to them and say, I do not give my consent. And as the GP is responsible ultimately for your child being experimented on, because if they delegate that responsibility to the vaccination service, they're still the overall responsible person.
So they said that the vaccine centres do not have access to his medical records. But I said, well, how do they know he's not got any medical
Well,
problems.
absolutely. Yeah. So how do they conduct an individual risk assessment on your son with his medical records if they can't access the medical records?
But you can't think of any way where I go from here to. Who do I write to? Do I write to anyone or?
Well, I'd write to your GP and I would write to the vaccination service. Yeah.
Right, because I think it's a community trust that might be doing Kroger area, and they have vaccinations, school vaccinations and what they do.
Yeah, I've spoken to them. They've been very helpful. Very helpful.
The people who will be doing the records because additionally they do the schools, but then the catch-up clinics are still part of the
It is, and my no consent at school followed on to the catch-up clinic. But they said to me, there's nothing you can do now because if they go into the community, into a vaccine centre, then it's down to just the mother's side. They want a no will outright a yes, but you don't lose one signature.
Whoever gives the form, whoever's the form, their suitable consent, they assume responsibility of giving the information. So if you accuse them of not giving the information, it's a criminal offence. So therefore, should be back, if they've given your son's form, then surely they should prove that they are giving him the risk as well as the benefit. There's no benefits now, even with that.
Well, that's... She's not going to take me.
No, it doesn't matter. If it gets to her, she's got it. But if she does it, she's liable.
Well, that shows it's too late then. But that still won't stop her from having vaccinated.
Something goes wrong, she's liable.
Yeah, but I want to get that
I think that's a very interesting subject you've raised. Thank you so much for opening up on it. We need to take one more question because we have to clear up the hall, get the tables and chairs away. So let's make it a good one. Who's got the best question? Young man, please go ahead. Oh, we'll just I've got a mic. Yeah, can you speak loudly?
I can try. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
I, as a young man with quite a young family, we've been talking on this subject at home with my wife, and I think, like many, quite overwhelmed with everything that's going on. My question, I've got several questions. People have said, who is behind this? What is the motive? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Would you say that they say that the devil leadeth the temptation, right? And that the devil here is something that's nothing new. That actually the devil here is money, capitalism, the fractional reserve system. And GPs, pharmaceutical companies, entire healthcare systems, our politicians, first past post system, the way people are elected, relying on donations. Money is power. And money also enables people with power to also control the information flow. So I often discuss with my partner at home, what can we do? What can we do? We can resist. We watched a movie recently about Gandhi, and it gave me a lot of hope that actually, we were talking earlier here about non-violence, and how powerful that was, that actually just, non-violent act from a single man was able to defeat the entire British Empire. But that was then, right? That was back in 1948, right? But I believe today, where I'm from, originally India, you talked about civil war, right? So we have that in India ever since, because it's divide and rule. And I see so many parallels between what happened then with the Hindus and Muslims, what is happening today with the Hindus and Muslims, and the vaxxers and the so-called anti-vaxxers today. So those people who are part of the system, who, like myself, have been vaccinated all my life, for going to India, polio, what have you. I've had all the vaccines apart from the COVID vaccine. But how can we come together in a meaningful way when money still controls everything? I mean, these are real problems that real people are facing. We can say no to a point, but we can't say no if we're now not left, we've got anything left to eat. We can't earn money because we've lost our jobs, or we can't do business with people because that's what everybody else is. So how can we come together and move forward and make a real change long term, where actually the incentive system worldwide is changed? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm not in any way minimising your views about the money and power, but the best things in life are free. Many of us here, and I'm sure there's many of you in the audience tonight who've been involved in local, national even, campaigns, whether you're full-blown activists or if you're just people that go to local groups, you will know the spiritual high you get from being with people who share your values. Because your values are the right values. Values don't cost anything. Yeah? And it's the people who are doing this to us, who've talked all the time about their narrative and their values. They don't really have human values. They're trying to dehumanize us.
Yeah.
But they're the ones who are lacking in humanity. And always remember that. They can't take your humanity away.
You're absolutely right? Starve people out and they'll comply to anything. So I appreciate money as a serious consideration in it. On the upside, of course, people losing jobs means that there'll be vacancies and, people will be shifting around doing different jobs. That's obviously a hope. In terms of care workers and healthcare workers, there are new organisations being set up to allow, for example, getting cottage hospitals going again in the community. There are practical issues with that. Oh, by the way, I'm on the steering committee of the World Council for Health, and that's one of the things we're looking into is setting up alternative healthcare systems. We've got a stumbling block in terms of personal indemnity insurance, but those things are happening. But of course, bartering, right? We'll be going back to doing things for each other without charging each other to do things for each other. So take the money out of the equation. That's also incredible. But in terms of what you were saying about the best things for free, all of us lawyers and experts that have been working together for the past year to help each other understand all of this, we will be doing it for nothing. Now, I can't run a litigation case normally without paying an expert £300, £400, £500, £600 for an hour and a half's work, where we just get the key points, and if I've got any further questions, unless my client can pay for those questions, we don't get the answers. We are getting experts from all over the world. Geert van der Bosch, the world's #1 expert, was on a Zoom call with us all last week for 2 hours, giving us his latest evidence, for free. All of us are doing it for free, right? So there is that absolute beauty that when you take the devil, the money, out of it, amazing things can happen. And I'm a great believer that, that's what we will do. We will invent new systems, we will get by, we will help each other, we will support those who are falling out on their hard, luck, and we will get through it. I'm a great believer in that. This is a spiritual war. This is a spiritual war. I love you all for coming, so I really do. I really genuinely mean that. I'm here because I do care about humanity, and together we will win this. So have hope, please, everybody.
It only leaves me to say thank you again for coming on tonight. Fantastic turnout. I'm so pleased with you all. And just want to say, obviously, a big thank you to our panel of guest speakers. a website, Mid-Sussex Assembly.org. There'll be a link on there. Okay, thank you. Good question. And I would just final thing to say is if you want to get involved and help us with local activities, please do so. Again, you can find us through the website, Mid-Sussex Assembly.org. Come and join us, it's free. We get a lot done. Thank you very much, all. Good night.
Yeah, great to see you. Yeah, cheers.